Hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for attending Coming to America, a conference that's examining the legal implications of immigration. My name is Alex Keeling. I'm co-president of the International Human Rights Law Society, and we're very proud to be co-sponsoring this event with Latino-Latina Law Student Association and also the Albert Schweitzer Institute. Let me first introduce the executive director of the Albert Schweitzer Institute, Mr. David Ives.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I think this is our second annual conference. Last year we had a conference on nuclear weapons, and now we're always looking for interesting programs, and this one is something that is near and dear to my heart, having worked extensively in Central America. And indeed, the law school has taken some trips down to Nicaragua, where we often work with people who are very poor and indigent. In fact, the teachers down there only make about $120, $130 a month, even with a degree. So I am often faced or asked by these teachers, what can I do to help them? Can they come to America? And it's kind of tough to stand there and be in a home that's made out of cardboard and have a teacher ask me, what can she do to improve her lot? Can she go to America? And normally I have to say that it'd be very difficult. So she's stuck. So from a moral point of view, since Schweitzer was a 1952 Nobel Peace Prize laureate, and we promote his values and ideas, especially humanitarian values, on a global basis, we think that there's no such thing as an illegal human being, and that should be reflective in some of our policies. So I'm very interested in what happens and what the speakers have to say today about this very important issue, because it deeply affects not only people that are already in this country, but people elsewhere who may want to improve their lives. So thank you, and welcome to you for coming to this event.
Thank you, David. Now let me pass the mic to our next speaker, who is an adjunct professor at the Quinnipiac University School of Law, teaching such courses as immigration law, and also the executive director of the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center, Ms. Renee Redman.
Thank you, Alex, and welcome. I'm going to give a little bit of background on U.S. immigration law framework and the actual immigrant population in the United States and Connecticut. And then I'll be followed, obviously, by two fabulous panels who will discuss more specific areas of immigration law and how immigrants live in the United States, with a particular focus on poor immigrants. So, people have been coming to the United States, or with the landmass that is the United States, for a long time. Before the Civil War, immigration in the United States was governed by states and diplomacy, largely because we did have slavery and we did have the slave trade. After the Civil War, well, I should say before the Civil War, however, there were large waves of immigrants, not only from the British Isles, but from Germany and from China after the gold rush. After the Civil War is when immigration law as we know it really got going. That's when the Supreme Court decided that immigration was to be governed by the federal government and not the state government, which is still true. And we saw waves of immigrants and correspondingly waves of immigration laws. They would come and they would go. We now operate under what we call the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. It was passed over Truman's veto, who actually wanted a more liberal immigration law. And I say that we operate under that statute, but of course it's been amended so many times it's almost unrecognizable. And I will tell you as a practitioner that it's a mess. As you expect, any law that's been amended many times is that there are many provisions that don't correspond with each other, that are contradictory, and there are of course others that it's very difficult to tell what exactly Congress intended. So I will say that practicing immigration law is not for the faint of heart. It's complicated. And that's just the law itself, not the issues of who should actually be allowed to enter the United States and stay in the United States. So very generally, Beginning in about 1986, our immigration laws started to tighten up. And over the years, there have been more grounds added to the statutes where people can be deported and that are used to exclude people from the United States. Again, very generally, people can enter the United States as immigrants and non-immigrants, and refugees as well, but they eventually become immigrants. And I think that's important to recognize. We use the words, immigration, but it's important to recognize that there are many different ways that people can immigrate. Who are non-immigrants? These are the people who come to the United States for temporary purposes, at least when they first, they're intending when they first come. Tourists, students, and some employment, people who come here to work, come for temporary purposes. And the immigrants, those are the lawful permanent residents, or what you may know as people with green cards. Who are they? Those are people who can live here the entire lives, and often do, can live here, work, raise their families. They cannot vote, they can't run for office, and they can still be deported for, at this point, what are relatively minor convictions and other offenses, regardless of how long they've actually lived in the United States. One example, I think, that is really coming to the fore right now are Haitians. Haiti has been really, in real trouble for a long time, and after the hurricane, of course, is extremely in big trouble and is destitute, and yet people are still being deported to Haiti. So, foreign-born in the United States, how many immigrants are we talking about? Between 2000 and 2009, the foreign-born population changed from 31 million to 38.5 million. That's a 24% growth in the foreign-born population. That's 12% of the United States. So 12% of the United States, más o menos, is foreign-born. In Connecticut, we have been number 18 on the list for a long time, from highest number of foreign-born to lowest number of foreign-born. We are still 18. 42% of the foreign-born or thereabouts are United States citizens. And anybody know who are the top sending countries? You can probably guess, but maybe not. Jamaica, Mexico, and Poland of the foreign-born. In 1990, Italy was in there. Sometimes India creeps in, but generally those are the top sending countries. Another statistic which you might find interesting, especially for purposes of today's discussion, is that for children under 18 living with at least one foreign-born parent, that's 21% of the population of children under 18. So 21% of children under 18 in Connecticut live with at least one parent who is foreign-born. And 26% of all children in low-income families live in immigrant households. So why do these people come to the United States? People come to the United States for all sorts of reasons, and sometimes they're interrelated, right? Visits, tourism, education, to seek refuge from persecution or torture, just to check it out. And how many people know young people who come to the United States saying, okay, I'm just going to come here for a couple years and see what it's like and then go home. Some people come here planning to stay permanently. A lot come planning to stay temporarily, whether it's for a few months or many, many years. But of course, plans do change, right? People fall in love. Economies fail. U.S. economy falters. Wars break out. So even though somebody may come to the United States with the intention of only staying temporarily, they may, in fact, end up living here their entire lives. I also want to point out that, and this is, we won't get into a lot of detail, but I just want to put this idea in your head, is that while the United States immigration system has this scheme of visas and everybody has to be locked into what type of visa they have, family-based, refugee, work visas, in many ways it doesn't address the reality of today's world. In today's world, people move. Where it's much more fluid. People don't expect often to live in the same country for their entire lives. It used to be that when people came to the United States, they were expecting to stay here and live here. They were never expecting to go home, either because of transportation difficulties, we didn't have airplanes, or because they were coming from countries where they would be unwelcome. That's different nowadays. And people, I can think of one example that a visa it really doesn't address are people who, say, are retired. A European falls in love with an American, is retired, has, Europe has free healthcare, right? Has healthcare, has a pension, wants to come live in the United States for years at a time, not work, not do anything. There's no visa for that, and not want to get married, unless they want to get married, right? But there's really no visa for somebody who just wants to come and live here for a while. I also want to point out that even though people often, they have different types of visas, again, that doesn't always mean that that's the underlying reason why they came. What's the underlying reason? And study after study has shown this. What's the fundamental reason why most people come to the United States? Work, right? It's not to commit crimes. It's not to get food stamps. It's not because we're a nice society. We work hard. We don't have siestas. We aren't fuzzy. They come here to work, sometimes to support themselves, often to send money home, right? And often with the intention of returning home. Some do, some don't. And that's true regardless of whether somebody comes on a work visa or not. Any immigration lawyer will tell you that there are not enough employment visas for the people who need to come and want to come to the United States. And that's not only for unskilled workers, that's for skilled workers. Skilled workers, and this is another point of our immigration system, skilled workers are going to other countries where it's easier to find work and they're welcome. We have a problem there. Many people come to the United States to join family members who are here. But we have to remember that sometimes that is, well, I should say often, that is tied to the fact that they're planning to come here to not only live with their family member, but to work here. And often the family member originally came for work. So work is almost always tied in there, even refugees. People come to escape persecution, but tied into that is often the need to support themselves. And then, of course, you have people who are undocumented or unauthorized. The undocumented population, just so we all know, includes not only people who cross the border without inspection, without being inspected by a United States official. It also includes people who came into the United States after being inspected with their passport, with their visa, but then stayed longer than they had permission to stay for, right? As soon as they overstay their visa, under the law, they become undocumented at that point. No, as you can imagine, nobody knows the exact number of undocumented people in the United States. There are some pretty good educated guesses, and it often depends on how somebody is defining undocumented, which I won't bore you with right now. It's probably anywhere between 11 million and 17 million, which I would suggest the exact number doesn't really matter because we know it's a lot of people. And it's also apparently coming out now that after 2009, the population is actually decreasing because some people are returning to their home countries. And of course, some people are also finding ways to legalize their status. Now, where are these people coming from? Since 1980, most undocumented people have come from Mexico. And it's not because Mexicans are bad and want to avoid the law. It has to do with history. Mexicans have been crossing back and forth across the border since before that part of the United States was still Mexico. If you're interested in the subject, there are several really good books that have been written within the last couple of years tracing the history of Mexican migration to the United States. In 2009, 62% of the undocumented population were Mexican citizens. 10% of the Mexican citizens currently live in the United States. The next sending countries are El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Philippines, India, Korea, Ecuador, Brazil, and China. That's 85% of all the undocumented in the United States. So what are we going to, oh, I should also say, what occupations are they concentrated in? As you'd expect, relatively unskilled labor. Although, I'm saying this very generally, it's not always true. There are quite a few, there's a large segment of the undocumented population who are skilled, and in fact, you've probably met people. Who knows somebody undocumented? Okay. Those of you who don't think you do, you do. Believe me, you do. All right, so But most undocumented people do work in relatively unskilled labor sectors: agriculture, construction, service, cooking, cleaning, restaurant work. Connecticut is not one of the top states for the pure numbers of undocumented, although sometimes the way people talk, you'd think we were. We do have quite a large undocumented population because we have a large set of jobs where people hire undocumented labor, especially in the service sectors. So the population of undocumented people has also been growing over the years, especially since the middle of 1980s, because the borders, one of the results of the closing down the borders is that people won't go back and forth. They'll stay here, ironically. So that's one reason. Another reason is that there are just fewer ways for somebody to legalize their status. The other reason, well, I should say not the, but another reason is economic conditions in the sending country. We, in the United States, maybe other countries too, but we tend to think that it's all about us. And part of immigration and looking at trends is looking to see what's going on in the sending countries. People don't pick up and leave their home for lightly, right? And pay smugglers unbelievable amounts of money, and often have harrowing experiences while being smuggled into the United States. The people who come to the United States are generally survivors, and these people are brave and they're determined, and they are not. They aren't lazy, let's put it that way. Let's see, and at this point, of course, because we have such a large undocumented population and the immigration laws are so difficult, we have a lot of what we call mixed families. Mixed families are people that include, you have families that have United States citizens, you have people that include lawful permanent residents, people who are in the process of becoming lawful permanent residents, people on tourist visas, and undocumented. At least 64% of children in unauthorized families are now United States citizens. That's about 3 million children are United States citizens, and their parent, at least one parent, is undocumented. As these children mature, their families become increasingly involved in civil society, schools, and churches, and their communities, and yet they're still undocumented. The other side of this is that you have a huge population of children who are brought here at a very young age, not by choice, obviously, because they were young, brought by family members. They've attended elementary school, intermediate school, and high school because it is the law that any child in the United States is to be educated regardless of immigration status. But when it comes time to college, all of a sudden, because of their status, they often cannot be enrolled in certain colleges, and if they can, they are not eligible for in-state tuition. So then you have a very large population of people who know really no other society except the United States and are American for all intents and purposes, and yet are unable to participate in civil society. They're stuck. I also want to just put it out there that the undocumented are not criminals. There are people who do commit crimes, but regardless of what you may think should be done about the undocumented population, and I think probably everybody on these panels is some shade of liberal, from flaming to maybe less flaming, but I don't think we have any conservatives. But even if you differ, we all have to start with the idea that these are people. They aren't criminals. They have come to the United States for the simple reason that they want to support their families, and they by and large work extremely hard. They have not come across the border and paid smugglers unbelievable amounts of money because they're lazy, but because the immigration laws make it impossible for them to actually come to the United States in a legal manner. Meanwhile, they do contribute their labor and skills to the United States. They participate in civil society. They pay their taxes. They are human beings who deserve all the human rights that everybody else does, and they certainly deserve to be treated humanely by law and society. So on that note, I look forward to hearing the panels, and thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erin Peck, and I'm the program director over at the Albert Schweitzer Institute. And I have the privilege and pleasure of moderating today's first panel, which is called Immigration and Consequences. And this panel will focus on the day-to-day vulnerabilities and challenges faced by immigrants here in the United States. We have three panelists that are with us today. One, we have Lorella Praeli from Quinnipiac. She is an undergraduate sociology and political science student. We have Husham Hussain, who is a refugee and volunteer for IRIS, which is the Integrated Refugee and Immigrant Services here in New Haven. And then our last speaker is Sister Mary Ellen Burns from the Apostle Immigration Services. So without further ado, we will begin this first panel with Lorella.
That's good. I was going to say we're going to watch a video first, but that's great.
Today, I break out of the silence I have been forced to live in for the past 20 years. I do not want to betray myself, my family, and the values of democracy, freedom, and justice that this country has taught me over and over. I am Hugo, I'm undocumented, and I'm no longer afraid. Legalization now.
Coming out means telling a friend, a loved one, a classmate, a teacher, something that otherwise you would have kept private. It is using our lives and stories as a political tool for change. I am done holding myself back. I am done feeling like I have to choose between my family and the life that I want. I choose both. My name is Ireri, I'm undocumented, and I'm not afraid.
I remember when I was young, they always told me, don't tell anyone about your status, because that could be taken away. I remember being scared every time they told me, but I didn't really understand what it meant to be undocumented until I got to high school. I began to feel ashamed, frustrated that I couldn't do the same things my friends could. Get a license, I couldn't vote, I couldn't study abroad. All these experiences growing up almost led me to give up on my dreams and my education. But one day, my mother reminded me that they brought me here for a better life. They brought me here so I could be somebody. After hearing that, I knew I couldn't give up. My name is David. I'm undocumented. I'm not a criminal, and I'm not afraid.
Today, I'm putting my whole life on the line as I come out of the shadows together with all of you and my friends here, because I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of putting my life and the well-being of my family on hold. I am Hugo, I'm undocumented, and I'm no longer afraid.
I refuse to think of what another 10 years of not knowing if I will be able to come home to my mother and brother will feel like. I refuse to think of what another 10 years of dreams shut down will feel like. Dreams of a good education, dreams of a normal life without fear. I am undocumented. I am not afraid. I will not hide any longer. I will come out of the shadows every day if I have to. I'm a human being. I deserve to be happy.
I came to this country in 1992 following my mother to the land where the bread that would feed her children was. My mother worked in a dark, windowless, fume-filled room for 12 years with her compañera side by side, not realizing that her lungs were getting filled with harmful chemicals. Anyone who had proper documentation would not work under those conditions. She died of cancer 2 years ago, and at that point I realized that I wasn't going to let my mother die in vain. I have made the choice to fight, and I stand here to say that I am not afraid anymore. My name is Nico, and I'm undocumented.
Every time that I want to take a step forward in my life, I have to consider that my options country, I am not free. We are not free. And I believe that this is the only life that I get to live. And I know that I am tired of hiding. My name is Tanya, and I'm undocumented.
This past summer, I graduated and was accepted into one of the most highly respected universities in the city. When my school supplies packed, I was excited, happy, overjoyed. I received a phone call from a person who worked for the financial aid office. I was unable to produce a number. I had my work stripped from my hands. I'm Uriel. I'm a student, a brother, a son, a friend, and an undocumented immigrant.
My parents and I immigrated here in 1991 when I was a year old. I've been undocumented for 19 years. Last year, I went to a rally like this where 6 undocumented young people spoke. It was the first time I'd ever heard anyone speak about being undocumented openly. They gave me a choice. Continue to hide and wait, or fight back. We need to show the country that we are not afraid. We are not afraid. Say it with me. We are not afraid. We are not afraid.
Senator Durbin, I am Hugo, and I would like to encourage you to not only support immigrants, but to lead in the Senate for a comprehensive immigration reform. I'm here in Chicago outside your office with a couple of my friends, and I would like to tell you to have courage. The time is now. Take the lead. Have courage. The time is now. Take the lead. Have courage. The time is now. Take the lead. Have courage. The time is now. Take the lead.
So this is the story of 2.1 million dreamers in the United States, about 65,000 high school graduates nationwide every year. But it's not the story of every single one of us. I am Lorella Praeli. I'm a student at Quinnipiac University, and I'm undocumented. I would stand here and say I'm also unafraid because I really like how that feels. But I think doing so would also be lying to myself and lying to you. I think I have found tremendous sense of empowerment in stepping out of the shadows only a few months ago, coming out and sharing my story publicly, but that doesn't mean that you stop living your life in fear, or that you worry about an encounter with the authorities. So that being said, this highlights the story of a couple hundred people in the United States that have found the courage and the space that has been created nationwide to come out and to share their stories. So like I said, I am a dreamer, and what that means is that I am dream eligible. And for those of you not familiar with that term, dream eligible means that I would qualify for the Development Relief and Education for Alien Minors Act, also known as the DREAM Act, which was first introduced in our Congress in 2001, has been introduced a number of times since then, either as a standalone or as a part of a comprehensive immigration bill, and was recently there again at the end of last year. I had the opportunity to be in DC for that fight, and saw its victory in the House and its defeat in the Senate when we were 5 votes short from getting closure to move on to pass the bill. So I just wanted to give you a sense of the reason why I wanted to start off with this is because I wanted to show you I wanted to share with you what's happening in the United States right now. And it's incredible, it's an incredible time in our history, or an incredible time in our time, because we are creating a space. So here you have a group of undocumented students who have learned to live their lives hiding and in fear, who are starting to claim new spaces. And I think we need to leave here today appreciating that and what that means, and understanding that this is only the beginning of much more to come. My story starts maybe when I was 2.5 and I had a car accident in Peru and lost my right leg. I started to seek treatment at Shriners Hospital a few years after that, which resulted in visits back and forth from Peru to Tampa, Florida. When I was 10, I found myself in Connecticut, in New Milford, Connecticut to be exact, and just grew up here. And when I was applying, at the end of my junior year and the beginning of my senior year, everyone is starting to talk about colleges. And I had worked really hard in high school. I was involved with anti-bullying programs and was really into history at the time, social studies, and was really excited to continue with my education. And I had grown up with this story from my mother that I was here for medical reasons and that I was allowed to be in this country, which I am very thankful for because I know how hard it is to go through your high school knowing about the limitations that come after high school graduation. But at this time, that narrative would not work anymore because I needed to apply to college and I needed a social security number and I needed to apply for financial aid. And I was not eligible to do any of these things because of my legal status. So being undocumented in this country meant that I could not apply for any loans, that I could not apply for financial aid, and that in Connecticut, I could actually not attend a state university and pay in-state tuition, which means that I would be paying 3 times more than another Connecticut resident to be at Western Connecticut or at UConn. So at that time, I learned about probably the hardest thing, what has been the hardest thing for me since then. I learned that I was undocumented and that I had to face certain challenges that my peers didn't have to, and that I had to find a way to fight my way to get into college and to be able to afford it, or for someone to invest in my education because I wanted a shot and I knew that I could do it. So I went through that fight, and for my first 2 years at Quinnipiac, I kept it low-key. I was involved in everything that you can think of. I was really excited about learning, but I wasn't ready to talk about my status. And I think for that time, I think Professor Duffy was the only person that knew. And after that, a few other people knew. And there were different events in my life that led to me taking this step at the end of last year. And I think part of that was being invited to a Kentucky field planning meeting, but also being confronted with this, there was a tension inside of me. There was the Lorella, the advocate for all these other things, for multiculturalism, for inclusive environments. And there was also the Lorella who lived in fear and who wanted to be involved. And I remember having these conversations of, how can I not be involved? There are all these students coming out of the shadows, and I'm sitting here and I'm comfortable. I'm just waiting for legislation to happen. And all of these things pushed me to take that step. And at the end of last year, in September, I think, last year, the mayor in New Haven, Mayor DeStefano, invited me to speak at a press conference. And I didn't have anything prepared. I just showed up. I didn't know what a press conference really was, I guess. But he says, you're speaking last, and we want you to share your story. And it just happened. And I share this with you because I can't really explain the liberation that I felt once I just put it out there. There was no more hiding, because you couldn't go anywhere. That was being played on the TV that night in the news. It was covered by the media. But I remember thinking that day, I was really scared about what could happen, but then I was also thinking, I don't have to come up with stories anymore. I don't have to come up with a safe answer or something that would be enough for someone else to believe. Why are you here? How are you here? Are you planning to work? Why aren't you working? Why aren't you getting paid? It was just out there. And I think that's important. It's important to recognize that this is happening in the United States. So I can talk about what it means to be undocumented forever and tell you this was a struggle here and this was really hard at this point in my life, but I also think it's important to tell you what is happening right now. When I returned from Kentucky and met with other dreamers around the United States, I left with a promise to start something in Connecticut. And when I returned, we co-founded, a few students, dreamers and myself, co-founded the Connecticut Students for a Dream. And we are an affiliate of the United We Dream Network, which is the national coordinating body for the DREAM Act. And they're fighting to make to make sure that undocumented students have access to higher education and can feel that justice is being fought on their behalf. But the most important part about all of this work is that what you're beginning to see is that we're no longer being spoken for. We are speaking for ourselves. And that is tremendous victory for us. So before I get a little bit more into Connecticut, I just want to share a little bit with you about my time in DC. Because I remember being there for the House vote, and I remember being really excited, really nervous, and really anxious. The votes are coming in, and we're in the gallery, and that's one more yay, that's one more nay. And we're holding hands, and I'm looking down, and I'm starting to think, could this really be? Could the DREAM Act really pass? It's been around for almost a decade. Is it really possible that I graduate in May and I can apply for a job, or that I can drive, or that I can be financially independent, or that I can stop living in fear? Could that really be? And we sat in the House and we watched the vote, and it passed. And right after that, we were all in tears because we began to imagine a different life for ourselves, a life where we continue to advocate, because the DREAM Act is only the beginning of what needs to happen, and that's comprehensive immigration reform. For 11.2, maybe plus, people living in the situation in the United States. But then I went back to the Senate a week after that, and we had been lobbying that whole time. We had been doing, sit-ins, and we had been meeting with chiefs of staffs and immigration staffers and legislators, and we knew that it was in close, that we had to keep our hopes up, and that there was a slight chance that it would pass. But we were hoping that maybe because we were sharing our stories and organizing and people were calling, that maybe it would pass. And it didn't. We were 5 votes short. And I sat there and I think like everyone else, the whole gallery was filled with dreamers, and then people who were there for the repeal, the don't ask, don't tell. But I remember just feeling so broken after that vote, and I couldn't understand what my life was going to be like, because I had begun to imagine all these other things. But then as I reflected more and more that, just that within that same hour period after the vote, I began to recognize that this was only the beginning, and that much work needed to be done still. So I came back to Connecticut excited to continue to build, and we don't have the capacity to do that right now with school and everything, but we have 2 priorities in Connecticut, and I think nationwide, and that's the legislative priority and the community organizing objective. So our legislative priority at the federal level is the passage of the DREAM Act, and we don't know when that'll happen again. But at the state level, that's the passage of a Connecticut in-state tuition bill, and the public hearing for that is actually next month on the 15th or 16th, to give access to higher education, to lower the tuition rate to a Connecticut resident for an undocumented student. But I think the most important part is the organizing and the empowerment. And that comes with 3 main points. That is to educate, to empower, and to escalate. And escalate is a little dangerous because we've realized that we've done the lobbying, we've done the phone calls, we've made the visits, and nothing is happening. So a lot of people are beginning to talk about, well, acts of civil disobedience. What are other things that we need to be doing to make sure that our voices are heard and to give us a chance to pass legislation? And to empower is the most important, because I know what it's like to live in the shadows. And I know what it's like to step out of the shadows and to not have to hide anymore. And it's not easy for people to take that step and to understand the risks or to accept the risks that come with being public about your status, but it's something that we're really fighting for. A lot of my work right now is meeting with high school students and getting them to see that there are more possibilities and their lives don't end when graduation happens in high school, because there are ways to go on with your education and there are ways for you to get involved with yourself. So yeah, that is a little bit of my work now and a little bit of my story. And I'm excited because I think this is a new chapter in my life where I'm no longer hiding, and I'm excited to educate and to have a conversation with people. So I am open to those who oppose the Federal DREAM Act and who oppose the Connecticut in-state tuition bill and who oppose comprehensive immigration reform. And I welcome those conversations because I think what's happened in our country is all we hear is political rhetoric. And we hear, you hear, we have to solve the illegality problem, or there are all these criminals running around. So I think that our work now is to educate people so that they know that there are people like myself, 2.1 million people, that there are 11.2 million people in the United States who are contributing with taxpayer money, who are not getting tax returns, who are working hard, and who are Americans. And I had a really hard time saying that. When I stepped out of the shadows in New Haven, I remember saying, because I'm American, just like that. Like I hesitated. And I think it was because for a long time, this country took that away from me through its laws. It did not allow me to recognize or to identify myself as an American. And so my freshman and sophomore and junior years here at Quinnipiac, I identified as Peruvian, and I was proud, and I still am. But that would be also, without me saying that I'm also American and happy to identify as such, would be denying more than half of my lifetime now, because I've been here for 12 years. So I thank you.
Thank you, Lorella, and thank you for choosing to start speaking for yourself as opposed to letting others speak for you. I also just wanted to point out before we continued with our second speaker that all of the biographies are listed in the pamphlet that you received on your way in. So if anyone is interested in learning more about our speakers, the information is right there for you. And also at the end of all three of our speakers, we will allow for time for question and answer. So if anyone does have answers at the end, we will address them at that point. So our second speaker is Husham Hussain from IRIS. So let's please welcome him. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am fully documented. Refugee. I never thought in my life to become a refugee. Every single person on earth might become a refugee someday. What is it like to become a refugee? Like, what is the break between your life and just become a refugee? You receive a call, or somebody drops a letter at your door, or stops you on the street and says, you have to leave within hours. I'm taking over your house and your things. I'm gonna bomb your house and your children tonight. And you hang up and you see your children still playing, involved in what they were doing, and you daren't stop them or wipe out that smile from them. I tell them, people, it might be the last hours, we have to live here. We have to leave. So it takes your soul, all your courage to decide what to say, how to shape the words to your wife, your children, and how to make a decision. You look back on your life. Every single person here, all over the world, has plans for hours to go, for days to go, for weeks to go, might be years to go. And all of a sudden, everything is canceled. You stop. You think of how to pack up, how to leave, what time to choose, what's the safest way, which road to follow. All these things. Then where to go? Yes, I leave, but where to go? To a second country? I've never been there before. Where to go on the first night, second night? To a hotel, motel, stay on the street with kids and wife? You have to be very courageous, very solid and tough to say, yes, we don't care, we're going to make it. Tell your family you are very tough. Once you collapse, they collapse. And that's how refugees leave their countries. An hour before, they were not refugees. Now they are refugees. They go to a second country. They don't know where to go, what the currency is. Sometimes the language is different. How to start, where to live, how to find an apartment, a place, just a place to start. Then, where is the market? Where is the bus stop? Where is everything? Where is the school? Is there schools for my kids or not? It's like hundreds of issues. Then you try to always answer questions for your family. Whatever they ask you, even if you lie, just pretend that you know, so that they are one part. They don't fall apart. And you start there. You don't know what's next. My status as a refugee is a very teeny part of all refugees of the world that are lucky to be considered for resettlement in a third country. And one day I received a call from United Nations, High Commissions for Refugees in Syria, Damascus. They told me they were calling from resettlement department at the United Nations, and they needed to see me. I went there with my family. They told me, there is an opening for you and your family in America. So I said, are there any options? They said no. Is there any reconsideration for future countries to open? They said no. So mostly refugees don't choose the country they go to. They come just like that because there is no other option. So I took my family aside. I said, look, people, we are offered an option to go to America. And America is a hard country to start. And if we go there, we're going to start working from day one, might be, until we die. Because we come with no credit, no work experience, work history, nothing. Might be very hard for us to be employed in the first time we are here. And we're going to suffer. So my children told me it's better than staying in Syria, where we are not allowed to work, were not documented, were not considered as refugees, even in Syria. In Syria and in Egypt and in Turkey and Jordan, they consider Iraqi refugees as tourists. They stamp their passports as tourists. So they are not allowed to work. Some of those countries allow your children to be in schools, others no. So they said, at least it's better to be documented at least and to find a job there, to start life. And we know it's hard, but you will be there with us. You speak English. So I said, okay, should I say yes? They said, go ahead and say yes. I said yes, and after a long process of screening, interviews, background check, we were approved to come to the States. We arrived in the States in April 2008. It has been 3 years now. I arrived in, I knew it was New Haven from the documents I received. I didn't choose to come to New Haven because I didn't have anybody, any anchor here, any acquaintance in the United States. So they do like shuffling names, and they picked my name, and I was sent to Connecticut, New Haven. And the first experience in New Haven, I came April 7th. It was 11 o'clock at night, and it was freezing. And it was the Long Wharf beach. It was very dark. I didn't know there was a sea there or something. And the driver didn't speak English. And whatever I asked him, he said, I don't know. I was shivering. What should I go? Like, where should I go at this night? What should I don't have a phone number. I don't have a contact thing. What should I do with my family? So whatever my family asked, I said, we're fine. Don't worry. We're fine. They're going to come and take us. But I wasn't sure. And a few minutes later, 2 people from IRIS, the refugee agency that's resettling refugees here in New Haven, came and called our names and said, like, are you Husham Hussain? I said, yes. It's my family, and I was relieved. So they took us to an apartment. It was warm. An Iraqi meal was already cooked there. So I was like surprised. I said, this is Iraqi food. They said, this is one of the federal requirements that we should provide a culturally appropriate meal the first night you're here. So I was surprised. So I started there. The second day, I started volunteering with IRIS as interpreter because they were in dire need for interpreters for the Iraqis that were coming. And after a while, they hired me. Now I'm a case manager. I receive refugees from the same point I was dropped 3 years ago, Long Wharf Beach or Tweed Airport. I welcome them with a smile. Welcome to America. You are safe now. I'm here for you. Don't worry. You are safe. We'll start here. Things will be easy. Not that much easy, but don't worry. You'll be there. You'll work. You will be fully documented. You will have social security number. You will have your kids go to school. Everything will be fine. But you will have to work. People sometimes, I put them in my car on our way home. I just feel they were weeping. So I turn my head, I said, what are you doing? And they are afraid of America. They know America is hard. And I say, please stop. If you are going to collapse now, you're not going to make it in America. America needs you to be tough. To be tough, even for not for yourself, for others, for your family. Pretend to be tough, even if you are not tough, so that you show your employer you are tough. Your new people, your Americans, you are tough. The United States government that brought you here, you show the government that you are tough. Don't collapse on me here. Some people hate this in the beginning. After 1 year or two, they come and kiss me on the cheek. They say, you saved us. You were hard on us, but you saved us. That reminds me of my Praeli professor at Pennsylvania University. She said, oh, Mr. Hussain, you're not going to make it as a Fulbright scholar in America. Your writing is bad. Your proposal is like under zero. Even your writing is like, if your style of writing is not acceptable as a scholar. So I went to University of Arkansas and I got A+. And I called her. I said, you just, like you let my spirits very down. I got A+. She said, that A+ owes to me. I made that. I made you that tough man. So you thank me for this. So the big barriers here for people who come to America is language and American culture versus the culture they come from. In Iraq, you are not allowed to touch a woman in public. And you come here, everything is co-education, co-thinking, co-picnics, co-things. And you have to reteach your kids that it's allowed here now. It's okay. You can have friends. I say, no, but you told me it's a shame. I said, that was Baghdad. Now we are in America. It's not a shame. We are equal. There is no gender discrimination here. You should learn this. The language barrier is very like in the first months of school, our kids get bullied here, bullied in class, because those children are very smart. They know that they cannot tell the teacher they are bullied. They don't have the language to claim this. They go to Bank of America. They don't know how to open an account. They call for a landlord to rent an apartment. They say, how much is your credit? What credit do you have? We come from a country that doesn't have credit. We don't have ATM machines in Baghdad. I took some client to start an account in his name, and I put some amount of $100 in his account. I brought his ATM card. I said, this is how you use the ATM machine. This is the balance. And he said, yes, a lot of yeses. And at midnight, he came, around midnight, he knocked at my door. I said, where is my money? I said, it's in the card. He said, are you kidding me? This plastic thing has my money? I said, yeah, this plastic thing has your money. tomorrow morning I take you to ATM machine and I show you. Tomorrow morning he was like the first person on the street waiting for me. So I took him to the ATM machine. I showed him how this plastic thing brings money. There's a lot of things to know here. A lot of things about law. You are not excused because you don't know about the law here. You cannot say, oh, sorry, I don't know English, or I don't know how to deal with that. Thank you for listening. And it's a long talk. I cannot finish, but I am ordered that I have no more than.
It's America.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but we'll have time for questions after. Thank you, Husham. I see you all the time when I'm at IRIS, and it's really great to hear your story and to have you here with us today. So I'd like to introduce our last speaker for this panel, Sister Mary Ellen Burns from Apostle Immigration Services. Is that good? Okay.
I'd like to thank Lorella and Husham for their generosity and courage in sharing their stories with us today. If I didn't know it before, in the last 2.5 years, I've learned there's nothing as powerful as a story to connect and to educate and to change the heart. And I come here somewhat unworthily because I am not sharing my story. And I am not in any way putting myself at risk by being in front of you. I am sharing other people's stories to give a little impression of some of the difficulties that obtain to people who are immigrants, and specifically the problems of people who are undocumented immigrants or illegal immigrants, for those who prefer that. But two preludes. The first, just to set the stage for seeing these folks in a certain light. I will refrain from talking about the Catholic social justice teachings because that's not appropriate here, but in looking at people as human beings. A statistic, the largest source of foreign aid to third world countries, getting clean water, helping people buy food, build a home, educate their children, does not come from the United Nations, doesn't come from the United States or any of the other G8s or G20s or G whatever. The largest source of foreign aid comes from people who are working as landscapers and busboys in restaurants, taking care of other people's children and hoping their own are okay. Working as CNAs, taking care of the elderly of our families. It comes from people sending remittances home to their countries. The greatest influence on foreign aid, therefore, comes from people documented and undocumented who leave everybody they have and everything they know to help out the people back home. A second prelude. I've heard several people, not many people's, but several people's stories of how they got here when they couldn't come off a plane. People I don't think like to talk about those stories, and I'll tell you in sharing this one woman's story, you and I can both judge why they don't like to talk about those stories. This woman came from Ecuador, and her voyage began in a fishing boat. That would normally have a crew of, I don't know how many people. It held, she thought, at least 100 or 150 people on the boat. They were in the seas sailing from Ecuador to Mexico for 3 days. They were given a little drinking water. They could not wash. There was no other hygienic facility. She watched somebody fall off the boat, and she was on the boat as it continued to sail, and she watched that person drown. Once they got through Mexico, they used various forms of transportation to get to the border with the United States. And as you probably know, the main path through the United States, from Mexico through the United States, is through the Sonoran Desert, which is in a couple of the northern states of Mexico and a couple of the southern states in the United States, particularly Arizona. Now, a lot of terrible things happen to people when they are in the hands of others who are only motivated by money. And so she was very afraid. People who can't keep up, just like the man who fell off the boat, people who can't keep up get left behind. And we can imagine what it's like to be left behind when you can't keep up in the Sonoran Desert. People are sometimes held later by the coyotes who brought them in the hopes that they can extort more money out of their families. I had another client who was in such a situation. He and another dozen people were held at gunpoint and threatened with a terrible slow death in the desert if their families didn't come up with more money. Fortunately, the Arizona State Police and ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, learned of their situation and freed them. Women, children are molested and raped, and I suppose men are too. This woman was terrified. So, as they were walking through the desert, and excuse me, but these are powerful stories for me. As they were walking through the desert, she was very devout. And she was praying all the way that none of these things would happen to her. And she decided, in thanksgiving for all the dangers she had overcome thus far in her journey, to spend her last day walking barefoot as a sign of her gratitude to God. She did this so that she could educate her children back in Ecuador. So that's another prelude as to what these undocumented people that we read about in so many comments sections to news articles. This is what they are willing to do to get here. So we must ask ourselves, we who were born here or got off planes to come here, we must ask ourselves, are they doing this for the heck of it? Are they doing it for fun? Or are they doing it out of a desperate need to care for themselves and their families? And as human beings, how do we respond to that? Do we recognize law that has a deeper and more profound source than anything our legislators can come up with? Do we recognize a unity for which human-made borders, and as someone mentioned, a border that has shifted, particularly our southern border, as we stole land, that those borders, for which those borders have no relevance? Enough campaigning, and I'll move on to some of the effects of having to live in the day-to-day undocumented. And again, I'm going to start with a story of a very young man whom I encountered in immigration court. He was 9 years old, and I saw him with a couple of people I thought were family members and actually were friends of his family. And I thought, surely he's there as a witness, but no, he was there as a respondent. And I later had occasion to talk with both him and his parents, and with all these stories, I may change a few details just simply so people cannot be identified, but the heart of their story is the same. He told me, as the way a 9-year-old boy would, about his coming to the United States. He came to the United States in somewhat the same route of the woman that I described. Although he started with a plane to Guatemala, and from Guatemala, sort of like that old Steve Martin movie, Planes, Trains, and so forth, by partly on a train. And fortunately, unlike a lot of people who come, he was inside the train. A lot of undocumented people travel through Mexico on the top of the train. He was inside the train. At some points he was in cars, but in the end they were walking. And he said he was the only child in the group. He didn't come with his parents. His family arranged for him to come alone. At one point, one of the men carried him on his shoulders. He was then just about to hit his 8th birthday. Unfortunately, and he described running and running at night with the sound of helicopters kind of echoing on the little mountain where they were to try to avoid the Customs and Border Patrol, but they didn't make it. And so he and the whole group were arrested because of his young age. He was eventually released to his family members here who are, like him, undocumented. I first heard this and I was furious at his parents. How dare they permit this, if not arrange for this to happen? And then I heard their half of the story, although they weren't opposing in their view. He was being cared for by great-grandparents back in their home country, and the great-grandmother was going blind, and the great-grandfather really wasn't related to him, and I gathered a little less desirous of caring for him. And the other person in the household was a young teenager who was actually an aunt of this young man. The father said to me, "I now have children here too. If I go back to our country, I have to take my US citizen children with me, and none of my children will be educated. I can't pay the fees for my children to be educated at home." There isn't any good argument to keep that little boy in the United States under the immigration law of the United States. And like the vast majority of the people I have spoken to, and it's a limited field, who want to get papers, his parents not only have no way to legalize their status now, but never had any way to come here legally. His story illustrates some of the effects of the restrictions of our law and living as an undocumented person in the United States. One of the biggest things is that you can't go back and forth, as Renee referenced earlier. That is a reality for many documented immigrants, not certainly for people in Husham's situation, but those who are come as immigrants. They go back somewhat frequently to their home countries, particularly if their home countries are in the Caribbean or South America. But that's an impossibility for an undocumented immigrant unless they want to try running through the Sonoran Desert a second time. So you have a separation frequently of parents and children who leave their children in their home country, particularly now. Not too many parents will do what those parents did, and I think, understandably and possibly, it's a good idea that they don't do that. But so you have children growing up without their parents. You have some of those children realizing there are other children with their parents who were born in the United States. You have spouses separated sometimes for a decade at a time. I've talked to a bunch of people who thought they were coming here for a brief time, but they kept working here. The situation didn't get better at home. The school fees still needed to be paid. And, then it's the house that they need to repair, and they know they can't get the money at home. And on the phone calls, the children are saying, "When am I going to see you?" It might be a child. I've talked to a lot of people who left when their wife was pregnant because now they knew they had another mouth to feed, or shortly after that child was born. These are children who've never seen their parents, other if they're lucky, than by Skype. There's the division of spouses, and you can imagine that kind of a long-term relationship for years, what that does to erode that relationship, what it does on the other end to erode the relationship. As people are lonely, people are in difficult situations, and it's very destructive. There's divisions within the family between the children who are, and I don't mean hostile divisions, but the reality of when your little brother was born here and you were not, and that little brother has a much bigger world of possibilities than you can have until we pass the DREAM Act in any event. There's the loss, and I see this where I live and work in Fairhaven, which has largely the immigrant community is Latino from about 18 different countries, Mexico and Ecuador predominating. And I also am a member of a church there on St. Rose of Lima, and our congregation's average age is 35. Now, most congregations would be thrilled to have that young a population. But the reason for that is that there aren't any elderly people, or very few. And many of these folks come from societies, and we're much more than our own. The presence of those elderly people, and not even elderly. I've had many clients say, "Oh yeah, my mom, she's so old," and then give an age that's considerably younger than mine. It's a great thing for humility. But in any event, where the presence of those people of wisdom and experience is so important. And, it's not the same by the phone or by Skype. It's not the same when your first child is born, not really to be able to go for your mother about, the breastfeeding's not working, or he's teething, what do I do with him now, or it's the families are never, they're not there, and they're not able to bring their relatives here. It's very, very hard to get a visitor's visa if you're a person of modest means from Ecuador or Mexico or any country that has a lot of undocumented people here. For rational reasons, I understand, but it's a permanent difficulty for these families. They don't want to hold their traditional celebrations of marking important stages of life without their family member present. It's very hard. In the workforce, of course, you don't have a social security number. It also means you don't have a driver's license most of the time. Certain aspects of our work system here are not available to you. If you're injured on the job, certain sections of our workers' compensation law don't apply to you if you don't have a valid social security number. Obviously, if you're permanently injured, you don't qualify for retraining. If you are partially disabled from work, you don't qualify for the payment that's the differential between what you used to make and what you make now. I mean, workers' comp isn't generous to anybody, but it's particularly ungenerous to undocumented workers. You may be a little shy about enforcing your rights to the things you do have a right to, such as minimum wage. Because, for example, if you complain to the Federal Department of Labor, although they are not going to do it, they're not going to report you to ICE or whatever. As they go through your employer's records, the employer will be nervous to have those with kind of shoddy social security numbers, and you can't tell me most of these folks don't know that their workers are undocumented. In any event, so the employer then can fire you with impunity not because you complained, but as a result of the investigation following that complaint. You have a difficulty even getting to your job because you can't get a license except in very few states, and Connecticut is not one of them. You can't register your car. You can't get insurance unless you do so through somebody else who's nice enough to do it for you in their name. There are just many silent obstacles. I've heard of people who the banks they put their money in the bank, they're moving back to their country, and the bank won't give them the money back because they can't prove their status. They didn't need to prove the status to take the money, but perhaps in some aspects the laws have changed if they've been here long enough. But it's a constant, difficult thing. So many things, and as Lorella shared some of us with this, so many things we take so much for granted aren't there. There's the constant concern that you can be, if you get in a car accident because somebody else rear ends you, the end result of that could be that you are being deported, right? The cops come. They ask both parties for their ID. I found many immigrants don't realize, undocumented immigrants, they think some ID is better than no ID, so they hand over their voting card from Ecuador or something, their ID from the Mexican consulate, which is basically saying, hi, I'm undocumented. Depending on what police stop you, a call can go into immigration. So because somebody hit your car, you end up in deportation. And I'd ask you too, when you hear the statistics about from our Homeland Security Department, I know it's their job to deport people who are illegal. And you can get deported though you have children here. They don't mind separating. They can put your children in foster care here. They will deport that 9-year-old boy and hope that his home country will have a foster care system for him. You'll see statistics about criminal aliens. I'm representing 4 criminal aliens, 3 of whom have received deportation orders. Their crime was not a crime under Connecticut law. Their crime was driving without a driver's license. But they'll go in the statistics as criminal aliens deported. So we have to look at those statistics. And You know, somebody's committing a lot of crimes here, or somebody's committing one terrible crime here. Let them go. Send them back. No argument from me. But a lot of the criminal aliens that are being picked up are committing the crime of just trying to drive to work, just trying to pick their children up from school. Thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you, Sister Mary Ellen, and thank you to all of our panelists. I'm not sure how much time we have. Like five minutes. I don't know if we have a question, David.
This question is for Renee. One of the things that I hear a lot about is that from people who oppose immigration is that one of the things when they come here is to drop babies here. What are the stats on that?
Let me just, because we don't have microphones, did everyone hear that? I can repeat it just so that we, okay. David just asked that a lot of the kind of false information that we're given for those that oppose immigration is that people just come here and drop their babies off and leave. And so the question was directed to Renee about statistics based on that.
Now it's on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, good. Actually, you meant like drop babies, like come here just to have a baby so they're a U.S. citizen, right? Yeah, it's a lovely term. They're probably the same people who don't believe in birth control. Okay, that was my, I'm speaking on my own behalf and not anybody else's. I don't know that there are statistics because people don't generally say that. It's ludicrous to think that people generally are coming here just to have babies, although I will tell you, I have spoken to people that have done that. They do it. It's like an insurance policy. I'm sure Sister Mary Ellen has too. Yeah, they view it as an insurance policy is that, okay, well, you know, this child will have more of a chance in life. I'm doing a favor, and maybe in 21 years, the child will be able to file for me so I can come. But it's a real long shot, but it's usually so that the child will have a better chance in life. It's not to help, you know, the parents or anything like that. Yeah, so it's not unheard of. But to think that we should get rid of the 14th Amendment because of that concern is ludicrous, I believe.
Directed to Lorella, on the Connecticut in-state tuition legislation, do they accord any kind of tuition break for people who get GEDs, Connecticut GEDs? So you have to be a traditional high school graduate, can't get a GED and then qualify.
Yeah, you can get, well, under Connecticut legislature right now, or legislation is, if you have a high school diploma from Connecticut, or the equivalent, which would be a GED, you don't qualify for in-state tuition.
I know, but what about this legislation
Then you would be eligible for in-state tuition.
GEDs, or we don't know?
No, the proposed bill is Senate Bill 40, Senate Bill 8, and House Bill 5282, and all of them, I believe, in the language in the proposed legislation says high school diploma or the equivalent.
But it also says you have to have attended high school for 4 years in Connecticut.
Okay, so GED doesn't do it.
Well,
unless you didn't graduate.
Yeah, and maybe if you didn't graduate at the end of that 4th year and then you just finished something up over the summer and got your GED, but you have to have attended. In other words, you can't move from another state as a senior, come here and.
Yeah, and then drop out and then get a GED for covering your last semester.
Yeah, no, that, yeah.
There are 11 states that have found a way to, so this comes into effect in 1996 under Section 505 of the immigration law, and which bans state and public universities from giving undocumented students access to higher education at equal tuition rates. And 11 states have found a way to circumvent the law and allow for that. And in Connecticut, it passed in 2007, but it was vetoed by the governor.
Anat?
This is Lorella too. When you talked about nothing having worked or feeling that you've done a lot of things that haven't worked, you mentioned two options. One is education, educating the public, and the other was civil disobedience. But then you passed by those two and you said, well, the main thing is the empowerment. And that's a word that's bandied about all the time. I wonder if you, except for feeling better, if you could say something more concrete, either legal, political, or whatever, about empowerment.
Yeah.
And you can also say it just makes me feel better. That's okay.
No, I think what's been amazing is, I was sharing this when I returned from DC, is to walk into Congress with a cap and a gown, and a cap and a gown have come to symbolize that you're a non-documented student or a dreamer. To walk through security wearing a cap and a gown just makes you feel good, right? But I think civil disobedience, education, empowerment, and empowerment being the most important, in that you don't need someone to participate, be politically active to feel empowered. But empowerment starts to happen once you start sharing your story, even with your friends. Because you begin to feel like you're claiming your identity, right? So for a long time, you learn to juggle two different selves. Lorella, the undocumented, Lorella, the quote-unquote documented. And once you it's hard to keep track of that. So once you begin to share with each person, you begin to feel, you know, like a lot of, I don't think it's easy. It's not easy to go to high school here and to not be able to get a driver's license. It's not easy to go to high school here and graduate and not be able to apply to a state college and qualify for in-state tuition. To be financially dependent on your parents, and to know that your parents are working really hard and that you can't contribute. So I think I think the government and the law, or the categories of legal membership, for a long time define your life and define what you can do and what you can't do, or who you can be and who you can't be. And once you start to change that for yourself and for those around you, you begin to just feel like you can take over the world. Like, you know, like I'm no longer just an illegal alien, you know?
We have time for one more, if there's any other questions. Yep, right there.
I was an undocumented student, graduated from the university, and then assimilated to society by getting a Social Security card. How does that happen?
It doesn't. It doesn't. There is no legal. So my options right now are to get married, and at this point in my life, that would be fraudulent marriage, or to get sponsored by an employer, which is not likely, because even students here who are with a student visa have a very hard time actually getting sponsored. So under current law, there is no way for me to regularize or adjust status. And I think at this point it's important to, and I think maybe we'll go into this in the next panel, but it's important also to mention that the law is very different. A lot of it depends on how you enter this country. So I am a visa overstayer, or I entered with inspection. And for someone who entered without inspection or crossed the border, the law is very different. So I can tell you about Julieta Garibay, who's 30 now, who has been advocating for the DREAM Act since 2001, entered without inspection when she was 12, is a nurse, has had her nursing degree for 5 years, married a US citizen because she fell in love in the last year, and there is no way for her to regularize in the United States. And she actually cannot go back, because if she goes back, she has a ban for 10 years. So she would have to wait 10 years to even start to apply to enter the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, yeah, there is no.
Yeah.
Being addressed in legislature, are they trying to fix this?
Well, that's what the DREAM Act, Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors Act is trying to do. So it's, if you enter the country before the age of 16, have been here for at least 5 continuous years, graduated from a public high school here, you're of good moral character, you would be, you know, had it passed, I would have been a conditional non-immigrant. I would have had conditional non-immigrant status for 10 years. I would have had to either gotten a 2-year college education or entered service. And then after the 10-year period, I would be eligible to apply to adjust status and become a legal permanent resident. And after 3 years, I would be able to apply to begin the naturalization process and become a citizen. So it's still a 13-year period, you know. And I think it's also important to mention at this point that a lot of people say, you'll hear a lot of conservative individuals especially say, send them back and tell them to get back in line. And I think what they don't realize is that there will be a line once they open the line. And the line would be passing the DREAM Act, because then I would be in a line for 13 years. I would be able to work here and I would be lawfully present, but I still would not be able to have, I wouldn't have voting rights for 13 years. And that's if I meet all the requirements and pay the fees of that time.
Okay, well, I think that's all the time we have for this first panel, but I want to thank Renee, Lorella, Husham, and Sister Mary Ellen for sharing your experiences with all of us. And I think we're going to take a quick break, and then a 10-minute break, and then we will return for the second panel, which will be talking about immigration and the law. So thank you, everyone, for being here.